Live now. Hey, hello everybody. We are live with another fine webinar with new guests and fresh topics. Let me go through these people. So we have Jimmy. He's the CEO of Inceive Interactive. He employs 60 people, of which 50 SEOs, which sounds to me like a total pain in the ass. He used to be a rebel skateboarder, and during a lockdown, he had this song on repeat, I Can't Wait by New Shoes. So if any of you knows this song, um, post a lyric of it in the chat, and I would love to see what the song is. We also have Mike Jackness. I like your name, by the way, Jackness. He's an e-commerce wizard. He also runs a really successful podcast called Econ Crow. And he killed billions of zombies. I don't know how he did it. And he absolutely hates the song Watermelon Sugar. Don't post anything about that song in the chat. He will kill you as well. And last but not least, we have Mads. He is the coach that protects all the executives from hiring panic. And he owns a outsourcing agency. He also runs an SEO company. So this guy really knows how to delegate. He loves the smell of fruit, all fruits, and he fiddles with his hands a lot. So everybody watch his hands during this thing to see if he's fiddling around. Okay, cool. Mads, take it away.
Thank you very much for the intro, Bibi. And yes, I will jump in here and share my screen in a second. So we're going to talk about hiring just because it's one of my favorite topics. Right. So can you see my screen okay?
Yeah. Oh, and if you guys have any questions, start posting them now, because our webinar wizard, Anton, will pull them up on the screen later.
Excellent. So yeah, just as you said, Bibi, I run a management coaching business where I basically help business owners in many verticals, mostly online business owners nowadays. And really, I help them learn and understand management. I also run a big outsourcing company where we have about 150 staff now. And then, as you mentioned, I run a SEO company where we do internal SEO. So basically build affiliate sites, flip them, and so on and so forth. So that is all a lot of fun. And like most people, I can't get enough. Right. So today we're going to talk about one of the things that are really important to me, which is hiring. And particularly when I work with newer business owners or people who are either looking to start hiring or hiring the second, third, fourth, fifth person, right? A lot of the time they're struggling. And I want to share some of the key points that I see from my clients and some of the key things that I find really help them in today's presentation. And really, my objective here is helping everyone become better at doing their initial hires. As probably logically makes sense, the most difficult hires is often the first. However, it is also the most important hires, which is why it is good to learn a bit and grow your skill set in that area, right? So the first thing I want to go through is basically when to hire. So when are you actually, as a business owner, ready to go and hire, right? So first of all, I tend to look at, does the business have some repeatable processes already, right? One of the biggest mistakes that most business owners do, and not specifically SEOs, but everyone really, is the fact that they go out and try to hire someone to do 7,000 different things. And while you can find some great people who can learn and pick up, it's not a very effective way to get started with as a business and really hiring people. So the first thing I always talk to people about is, do you have some repeatable processes? And really, do you have something it doesn't necessarily have to be on paper yet, but do you have something that's repeatable and actually takes a significant amount of time, right? One of the things that happens with a lot of first hires is the business owners go out and they say, oh, well, I have these 20 different gaps. So I need someone who can do some graphics, build me websites, do some Excel, call them customers, and they basically have all these different skill sets that doesn't really fit into one person, and they try and like hire this kind of octopus kind of thing. Basically, in many cases, when trying to replicate themselves, and that is not a great idea, right? So first and foremost, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a bit, but first and foremost, the key aspect is what is really the key things that you need someone to do that take up a significant chunk of time. The second thing I like to look at when I'm considering if a company is ready to hire is where are you standing monetarily? So how much money are you actually making? Because one of the big challenges a lot of business owners have is if they start spending more money than they have and they start struggling to pay their bills, that can be very, very difficult. And the problem is in most businesses, if you're not making enough money to pay your bills, that stress will bring you down. Now, sometimes hiring a great person can actually help grow that up quickly. But in many, many cases, if you hire too early, that extra expense can also put a lot of pressure on you. So I really try and make sure that I'm at a point with a business where I'm actually making enough money that I can comfortably pay for that additional employee, right? Because that takes a lot of stress away, being able to do so. Now, the last thing around this is really looking at, where to hire. And generally, again, I like to look at the world as one. And I think fundamentally nowadays, like particularly here after COVID, you'll see a lot more companies hiring everyone in the world, right? So I really believe it's very important to understand what are the things you need done and where can it be done most cost effectively. So it's not about cheapest, it's not about necessarily the best, but I really try and look at ROI and most cost effectiveness, right? So that's sort of the key thing to look at when I'm considering is this company ready to hire, right? The second aspect, and this is one that's very, very dear and close to me, is helping get the right people into the right seats. So personally, I spend a lot of time working with behaviors and really understanding people's natural strength. So one thing that most people are not aware of is that like everyone have natural strengths and weaknesses. Everyone have natural tendencies, right? It's very easy for people to think everyone else is like them, but they're not, right? So some people are just naturally great looking at spreadsheets, looking at data, looking at numbers, and it's just something that naturally comes to them. Now, other people are naturally great going out talking to other people. They're naturally great, communicating and so on. Some people are extremely driven and is willing to do whatever it takes to achieve whatever goal they have in mind. So there's very different kinds of people in this world. And it's really, really important to understand different types of people with the particular roles you're looking for, right? Now, if we take one example around SEO, for a lot of SEO roles, you're typically looking for people that are quite detail oriented. So if you're having people who are, sitting optimizing and building internal links and so on, like getting the right anchor text is important, right? So finding people who are very detail oriented is very critical in certain roles. Now, if you're someone doing outreach, it might require a different kind of person. It might not all need to be 100% perfect, but it might be a volume game instead, where you need someone who is just very, very quick at getting stuff done. Maybe not at 100% accuracy, but maybe 90%, but just extremely fast, right? So learning to understand what it is you're looking for and learning to understand different types of individuals will really help you put these right people in the right seats. And one of the exercises I do is when I have a bunch of things that I would like someone to do, I always sit down and look at, is this the same people doing it? And a very common example for the SEO world is people often look for developers who are good with graphics. Now, there is some developers that are half decent with graphics, and there's some graphics people that are half decent developers, but you very, very rarely find someone that is excellent at both. right? So a lot of the time people want someone that's excellent at both because that would solve a big problem. But reality is, in most cases, if you want great people, you might be better off hiring full-time one or the other, and then hiring the external capacity you need in terms of freelancers or the likes to cover the other need, right? So really, when you're looking at roles, when you're looking at tasks, really try and sit back and see generally around you, is it people doing those same tasks at the same time, right? So really learning to fit the right people in the right seats is really, really critical for success, because you can take some great people who are absolutely awesome and will be extremely successful in one role, and you can put them in a role that does not match their natural strength, and they will be absolutely terrible at it, right? So matching those two up is really critical, and it's one of these things that people often make mistakes with when they hire initially. And one of the key reasons is that you have certain people that are very good at selling themselves. Like most SEOs are actually not very good at selling themselves. They tend to be quite reserved, and if they've been an SEO for 10 years and someone asks them, are you good at SEO? They're like, well, I'm kind of okay. Like, they don't sell themselves well. Whereas you have other people who looked at SEO for 3 minutes and you ask them, are you great at SEO? And they're like, yeah, I'm awesome. And sometimes, particularly when you're new to interviewing, seeing the difference between people who just talk a good game and people who can actually deliver is really, really important. But we'll get back to a little bit more of that in a little while. Next, when it comes to automating, and this is one of the most critical pieces for me, because a lot of hiring is a numbers game, right? So many times I see people put out a job ad, get 20 applications, and then hire the best person. Now, one of the absolute key things is you don't want to hire the best person if they're not good enough, right? So the whole focus generally is to make sure that when you're hiring an individual that you're very comfortable can do this job, right? Not just the best of the pile. And particularly if you're in a company that's really busy and you just want to fill a seat, it's very appealing to someone hire something that you're like, well, they're not great, but I think they'll do, right? But really, hiring people that aren't great is so expensive to a business. And the key focus of any hiring is not as much to hiring the best human being as much as it is avoiding failure. Because the worst thing, the most expensive thing you can do for a business is really hiring the wrong people, right? And this is where automating your hiring funnel comes in. So the key thing here is when you're recruiting, you want to get out to as many people as you can, right? Like when I make a post, I would ideally have 2, 3, 4, 500 applicants, right? But the key thing here is starting to look at what makes it likely that a candidate is successful. So let's again take a very specific SEO example. So let's say we are looking for an individual as a content manager, for example. And generally, let's say we run a large site in the outdoor sporting niche, for example, and we're looking for a content manager, right? Now, if that is the case, there's a certain number of things that we could go and say, this would make it more likely that the individual would be successful. So for example, for a content manager, if they have any kind of education that's relevant to content, so that could be journalism or that could be, English literature, so on and so forth. So you could basically go in and make some criteria. So if you have a big pool of 500 people, you can go in and make some criteria that brings that number down. And here a lot of people is like, well, wait, because there could be someone in the people we sought out that are really amazing people. And that is correct. But the whole game here, the whole game when you're dealing with volume is not that you want to interview 500 people. The whole thing is, if you just take a random sample, as I said earlier, of 20 random people that apply, right? And you just pick 1 in 20, your chance of success only is a certain amount, right? Whereas if you have a big pile of 500 and you generally are able to bring it in to people that are more likely to succeed, your chance of making a hiring mistake significantly decreases. And that is really the key game here, and the key reason why automating and putting automations into your funnel is really important, right? So you're starting to look for what are the key things. Now, sometimes this could also be skills assessment. So for example, if you're hiring a graphics person or if you're hiring a developer, you very likely want to put some automation around tests specific to their job roles, right? If you're hiring from places like the Philippines or India or the likes, if it's relevant to the role, for example, English testing could make a lot of sense. Because everything else being equal, if you have 500 Filipino people, for example, if you have 50 of them that are extremely good in English, everything else being equal, the ones that are good in English will probably be more likely to be successful because they communicate better and they cover certain skills that some of the other ones might not. Other things that we love looking at is things like typing speed. Again, everything else being equal, if you're working online, the faster you operate a keyboard, the more likely you are to be successful. So depending on the role, it's very important to sit down and try to figure out what are some tests that you can actually do that makes more likely that the individual is a good fit for the role, right? Now, other things that can be automated, and I mean, even starting out with simple things like Google Forms, instead of just getting people to send a resume to your email, can help your ton, right? So with a Google Forms, you can ask a bunch of questions. You can make sure they submit things in similar formats. You can ask critical questions. So some of the things we always ask, particularly when we are hiring in non-Western countries, is we always ask people to attach screenshots of internet speeds, or that could be of computer specs and the likes, because again, everything else being equal, if someone have good equipment, if they have a good internet connection, they're probably more likely to be successful in the role than if they don't, right? And a lot of time, if people have very good hardware, it also shows that they're investing in their online job opportunities, right? So really figuring out all the things that you feel you can do and really getting it automated. So again, you can put it into Google Forms. You can ask people to attach results. One of the things that we love doing for most roles is getting people to record a 2-minute video of themselves, just talking about why they would be a good fit for the job, right? Doing that, for a lot of people, that sounds like really strange. And there's probably some roles like developers where I would not do that, just because developers typically are extremely introvert people. And very often the best developers are not ones that enjoy being on camera. And even for an amazing role, sometimes they wouldn't go on camera, right? So, but in most cases, getting a 2-minute video of someone will actually tell you so much. Like the first time I did it, I still remember we were looking through 30 candidates and we literally removed half the candidates from the process just from a 2-minute video. And again, sometimes it was assessment of language skills. Sometimes it was the fact that they just kept babbling on but didn't have any value, or they were just talking instead of being specific, which was the case we were looking for in that particular role. Sometimes it's the seriousness of the role. Like, we had a woman apply, and she was sitting in a car trying to record a video with 3 kids around her screaming. Now, again, everyone have kids, but again, if you're interested in a job, if you're very interested in a job, you can probably find 2 minutes to record a video where you're taking it serious, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff that you very quickly realize from things like that. But the fundamental piece here is that the more you can automate, the simpler you can make it for you to compare people like for like, and take a big pile of candidates and really bring it down. That makes it significantly easier. The second thing is, the more hoops and the more difficulty it is for people to get a job, the more likely they are to stay in it. If someone just you get on a phone call with someone, and after 10 minutes you're like, yeah, I will hire you, and so on. If people felt it was really easy to get the job, it generally also makes it very easy for them to leave that job, right? And if you take Google as an example, I think in average you have to do like 12 interviews to actually get to work for Google, right? And that is one of the reasons, and they've done that pretty much since the beginning, right? And that's one of the reasons why they've had a lot of employees stay around for a very long time, because they make it very, very difficult to get in the first place. And even though that's very difficult when you feel you're busy, you're constantly SEOing, you hardly have time, but getting the right people is so critically important, right? Now, one additional piece to this: as soon as you can afford it, even when you're a smaller company, getting someone involved to help you do some of this stuff. That could both be setting up automations, but also, for example, checking two things, and sorting out candidates, and again, resumes. Like if you insist on people emailing you, as an example, create a separate email for jobs, because you don't want that stuff to clogging up your inbox, right? And I've seen so many times when I work with clients that they're trying to like find all these resumes floating around the inbox, and it's not a great system, right? So again, even finding someone with some decent skills in the likes of Philippines or Eastern Europe or the likes, you can get a ton of help to do a lot of this basic stuff. The key things for you as a business owners to do is the interviews, right? So a lot of these videos, a lot of these tests, you can have someone who can look at the test and very easily sort out, who are the great people. Now, ideally, when you get down to the bottom of your hiring funnel and you only have maybe 10 people left, you ideally then want to do interviews, right? And that's the next piece. So interviewing, particularly when it's the first time in your life you're doing it, can be really difficult, right? It's not something we have done a lot. Most people haven't attended a lot of the interviews on the other side, but generally things we don't do very often is often something that we're difficult with. And also, again, a lot of SEOs are naturally introverts. So meeting a random stranger is not always the most comfortable thing for them. But there's a couple of key things that I recommend doing. So the first one, and this is a mistake that many do, but the first one is make sure that you have a general list of questions that you ask every candidate. You want to ask every candidate the same questions generally, so you can actually compare them like for like. So I see a lot of people just starting interviewing and asking random questions and sometimes not taking notes, but I really, really recommend that you ask like for like questions. Sometimes there might be specific questions about their past or the likes that would be individual based on a job or something, right? But generally you want to ask the same questions, and I really recommend at least writing down the essence of the answer for each question, so that when you're sitting at a later stage, you can actually compare different candidates and different answers to questions, right? So that's the first thing that I find is very important. And I think in the beginning, this is a good helping hand, right? Now, a lot of people then ask, what question should I ask? And that's a great question. So again, I have a couple of sort of personal favorites that I like to look for. So I like to look for and understand much more about people's attitude than their skills, right? And honestly, for most SEOs, like if you're hiring someone to be head of SEO, yes, you definitely need skills. But in most roles, when you're hiring people within SEO companies, where you're looking for people to do things like link building and the likes, honestly, most of that doesn't require a huge amount of skill. And you're much, much better finding individuals who are very eager, very willing, and have a great attitude than you are having someone who have done it for a year but have had horrible results, right? And sort of the key questions, and this is a bit different from each person, but the key questions that I love talking to and looking at is questions around honesty. I like asking about how people have been treated in the past, and how I like hearing about their past experience, to see how they look at it. So some specific questions that I like in that regard is, for example, who's the best boss you've ever had, and who is the least good boss you've ever had, right? A lot of people, when you ask them about the least good boss, will be like, yeah, I was in this job, I hated the job, the boss was horrible, and I couldn't do my job because the boss was a jerk. So the whole thing is, if people have a blame mentality where they blame everything else than themselves for issues, that is, in my experience, not a good thing. Like, I've had bad bosses, and that doesn't necessarily mean that my performance is horrible, right? Like, I've had bosses that I didn't particularly enjoy working for, and I recognize that they were not the right bosses to get the best out of me. But that doesn't mean that I would ever turn around and sit and be like, oh, this guy was an idiot, and he was a horrible human being, and so on. While this might be the case, a lot of the time my experience is that positive people try to take ownership of their own input, right? So that's a particular question I like. I have a couple of questions about honesty that I feel is great. So I like asking very specifically, if you have to work either by yourself or as part of a team, where do you feel you will do best? And if you have to pick one or the other. Because the thing is, when you ask and or questions, most people will be like, well, I'm great working in a team and I'm great working by myself. But what I've found is that the people who answer it very directly and who pick something straight away and says, I'm better working on my own because X, Y, Z, or I'm better working in a team because I love being surrounded by people or whatever, the answer doesn't matter so much. But the fact that they're willing to stand up and actually share what they believe and basically share what they know about themselves, I've always found works extremely well. I also love asking a question about weaknesses that used to be very popular. It's not really anymore. But the reason I do, and most people will tell you their weaknesses because they're perfectionists, because they've read online that's the right answer. And that is generally not a good answer. But really what you're looking for is people who answer you something very, very honest, right? Like, you're looking for people to come out and give you an honest answer, right? So that could be. I had a girl that I literally hired on the spot, and I remember her specific answer to this question was like, sometimes when, particularly if something blows up or I'm not doing well, I can get really angry or really frustrated, and I know I have to go to the bathroom, sit down for 5 minutes, cool down, and then come back out, right? Now, some people be like, "Oh, that's horrible. I don't want someone that get angry." But the whole thing here for me is it's not really what people do or what people say, but it's the fact that they're willing to admit to you that they have a weakness. Because reality is we all suck at something, right? But if you're actually willing to talk about it, if you're willing to share that to a potential employer, for me, that honesty and that trust have always been very, very beneficial, right? So that's a couple of key things that I've found about interviewing that I've always found to be, yeah, incredibly helpful. Now, so again, key thing when it comes to interviewing and particularly hiring the first people is go out and do it, right? The first time you're interviewing someone, you probably don't know what you're doing, right? And that's okay. First time you do it, the first 5 times you do it, you don't have a lot to compare with. So it can be difficult for you to see, is that a good interview or not so good interview? Key thing I recommend, get out there and do it, right? Do some interviews, interview some people, try it out. There is some good books. One of my favorites is called Who, around hiring. But really, like most things, like SEOs, get out there and do it a little bit, practice it. Even if you're not ready to hire yet, go and interview a couple of people and just try it out, right? That can be super, super helpful. So yes, that was a few of my absolute favorites in terms of interviewing, and I hope that is good. So if you have any questions, please feel free to fire off in the chat, and I'm sure Bibi will ask away.
Hey, that was great. And I'm hiring a bunch of people, so I'm glued to the screen. And we have a first question from Craig. Hi,
Yeah.
Craig. He says, how to motivate people to work efficiently that never meet even simple work metrics. Employee A build 10 cookies a day. Employee B builds 100 cookies a day.
Right. So again, I think this probably comes down to what I talked about early on, which is the right people in the right seats, right? So sometimes it's not just a motivational thing. Sometimes it's also a natural tendency, right? So again, that's one of the things, as I said, that we love testing is the likes of people speed with a keyboard, right? We found the likes of computer gamers are generally really good at SEO, because if you're a computer gamer and you've been used to like shortcuts and using keyboards, that generally makes you extremely fast on a computer. And everything else being equal, if you're extremely fast at using a keyboard, things go faster. Now, even simple things like using Control C, Control V, instead of right clicking and pressing copy and right clicking and pasting, the difference in time between those two things is gigantic, right? So the first thing is, if you need people where speed is important and IT sort of skill set is important, again, you really want to test that initially. Now, the second thing, if you're already in a situation where you have employees like that, there's two things you can do. So one of them, and this is when I get people to do things, there's often three steps, and people often miss the middle one. So you can show someone how to do something. The second step is watch them do it. And
Yeah.
the third step is to let them do it. Most people go from show how it's done to go do it. But the problem is that if you get into a bad habit, if you're doing something wrong, it's often difficult to see where it goes wrong. Whereas if you actually watch someone do a task, you very quickly pick up if there's something they misunderstood. Obviously, if it's a 4-hour task, that will take you a while. But a lot of the time, if you show someone something, if you show them a new process, watch them and actually go through it a few times with them doing a screen share with you, right? Because you showing them doesn't mean they understand. A lot of the time, like, it's in the fingers. A lot of times, if you haven't done it yourself, it can be difficult to do. And for some people, for some business owners in particular, it can be very hard to understand that that's difficult, but it really can be, right? So get them to do it while you watch them do it often help a ton, and it often helps you see where the challenge is. Sometimes you realize someone is very, very slow because they're doing it in a weird way. Or as I said before, like, sometimes I've had people I've watched do tasks where suddenly they start right clicking to copy. And, I understand that if I can teach them to do it much faster, or I could, if it's a brand new employee, I could look at someone who's already faster, right? But the ideal is to really test that sort of stuff before they start. Now, if they're already in the door, again, you can help coach them. Now, one of my favorites, if you have employee A and B who are miles apart performance-wise, is to talk to them and say, hey, employee A is doing really well. I would love for you to spend an hour or half an hour, whatever. First, employee A shows employee B how they do it, and then employee B shows employee how they do it, and then basically ask employee A, who's much faster, to see if they can help employee B improve. So why I love that is because as a business owner, your time is the most valuable. So the less input you have, the less of your time that it takes to help improve a less good performer, the better, right? And if you can actually delegate the responsibility of helping growth within the business to employees that you have, that is a huge benefit. It encourages the good employees to do better, and it also built a little bit of peer pressure, because when employee B can see that employee A can do it, it kind of builds some of that pressure internally in the team as well. And also it gets them gel together and get your employees to be very willing to help each other and so on. So
Yeah, that's a great tip. I had it one time where somebody was really slow, and then they shared their screen while they were doing a task. And then I found out that they were way too perfectionistic about it.
yeah,
So I'm yeah.
and that's where it's really important to understand what are the tasks that you need to be perfectionistic and what are the tasks that you don't. And often you have to hire the right people for the right kind of task, because someone by nature who is perfectionistic have a very difficult time just to run through things, right? So sometimes, particularly in outreach, I've seen it where there's so many very detail-oriented SEO types that they're doing some kind of skyscraper outreach, and it's just a volume game. But they spend so much time, checking 500 email addresses and so on, instead of, they could do 4 times the volume if they just ran through it. So even if 10 emails doesn't work, it doesn't really make a difference, right?
Yeah. So let me ask you, Jimmy, a question. So you run how many SEOs? Was it 50 in your agency? You manage 50?
Something like that.
Yeah. So what if they would each make a 2-minute video? How big are the chances that you would hire them again, if you were hiring them?
It's a very good question. We don't use the method. I've heard of it before. I like it. I think, one thing I'll say to that is we actually, for more senior roles, call it mid to senior level roles, we don't do any inbound. We've stopped doing it. We strictly recruit people who are employed and poach them, if you will, because we've found that we will waste a lot of time on inbound applicants in those more senior roles using any kind of pre-screening or automation or those types of things. In the lower level roles, I love those kinds of things. Anything that gets you to a database really quickly. I think one thing we could do and would be really useful to us is to, in a little bit lower in that funnel, when you get to say 20 or 30 for a more entry level role that you're really interested in screening those 30, start with a video to save time on our side. I think most of the people that work on my team now, I've got a fantastic team, couldn't be more happy and proud of them, would have passed that test. They generally all went through a pretty rigorous interviewing process, even for more entry level roles. So, I love the process. I know a lot of people have been really successful for it, especially for higher volume type of hiring.
Yeah, but you have a rigorous process, you say. So how long does it take, approximately?
Yeah. So again, different for different roles in terms of what it's going to look like on the candidate side. Like the reality is, anyone that runs an agency, and Mads hit on this, is going to be in situations where it's kind of like, I need a person, right? There's just no way around that. So doing really well at this game on the agency side is actually all about forecasting that and then recruiting to it way ahead of time, which I'm sure Mads is very familiar with. There are situations where certainly over the 8-year history of our company, where we've hired faster than we would have wanted. We've done that and had really lucky, tremendous, successful experiences. We've also done it in some cases and had regrets about doing it. A normal process, let's say, for a more senior SEO is 4 interviews, something like that, with stages of different teams, starting with our recruiter. Typically, and I would advise to anyone, getting a little off topic here, but rather than just interviewing, we like to have people actually do work if there's a way to make that happen before you bring them on. Because you are in an industry like ours, and the way that we do work with clients is very sort of consultative, and some of these more senior roles, you're really getting married to each other, and you want to make sure that it's not like a work experience, work issue fit, which again, at these more senior sort of consultative roles, it's very hard to test for in a take a test type of way, right? You really want to put them in real client scenarios, see how they deal with those types of things.
So
just maybe one of my favorite tests for lower level roles for more SEO people. One of my favorite things is testing Excel skills, because again, the key thing here is that most detail-oriented people by nature are great with Excel, right? So one of the ways where, if you're not so good at understanding people's behaviors and so on yet, if you actually test for Excel skills, if you give them a test, and again, like get them to do like a 10-15 minutes test, that could be creating some pivot tables and doing some graphs or something, you very, very quickly see who understands Excel. Now, again, everything else being equal, people who are great with Excel are generally going to be more detail oriented, right? So that's, for me, that's one of my favorite tests. What I would add to Jimmy's comment, I love that for the more senior role. So one of my favorite places to hire and add people to our hiring funnel is actually LinkedIn, specifically because you can see the jobs they're doing and so on, right? And you can search very specifically, both if you're actually in a physical location, you can search very specifically in a physical location, but also for particular skills. So if you need someone who's an expert at SEMrush, you can, go into LinkedIn and literally put in SEMrush, right? And that brings a huge value, right? One of the things that we found works extremely well, and it's very important it's done the right way, is to not necessarily ask, hey, are you interested in a different job? Because what tends to happen is if you're trying to poach someone directly, the first thing that they say back is, how much are you paying? And even before interviewing or talking to them, it very quickly becomes a money thing. Yeah. And before anything else. Whereas really what we found works really well is saying, we currently have this job opening. Would you happen to know someone that would be a great fit for it? That sentence, that specific sentence works so much better for two reasons. One, we actually get a ton of referrals. So we get a ton of people saying, well, actually, I have a great friend who is also in SEO, who is, awesome and looking for work. Or we get a few people coming and saying, hey, I'm actually, considering checking out a new job or whatever, right? But that way, when you're not poaching them as directly, it also feels it's a little bit nicer conversation you get into, even if they are interested. So we have found that have significantly higher success rate than sort of trying to message people directly and say, hey, do you want a job?
Yeah, it's the power dynamics that comes into play. So Mike, what kind of sneaky tactics do you have to find the right people?
Yeah, I mean, it's a total numbers game. For me, we've hired a hiring manager. For me, that's been my secret weapon.
Oh, that's cheating.
What's that?
That's cheating.
Still didn't hear what you said. Say that again.
That's cheating.
Oh, cheating. Sorry. Yeah. Maybe, but I like to put myself in an unfair advantage, right? And that's the way to do it. I mean, I just, when Mads was asking, when someone asked what you're not good at, for me, honestly, like going through and doing things that are tedious is one of those things. I'm just horrible at doing the repetitive, tedious type stuff. And so we've hired for all of those things. And it's been like this for quite a while. And you were just asking a question of Jimmy, of like the people that you have, how many would you hire back if they recorded a video? We currently have 27 employees. I can say 26 of them we would hire back. I mean, we spend a lot of time in the interview process to make sure that we get the right people. And we spend a lot of time after we hire them, making sure that we have a great environment to work in, that we coach people, we encourage them to grow, provide them good benefits, treat them like human beings, give them good vacation and other benefits, and make exceptions for things like someone's relative dying or something, and not just being like, sorry, you're out of vacation time, and things like this. And so and even when everyone goes through struggles, especially right now in COVID times. I mean, the one person who isn't doing a great job right now, almost certainly it's some repercussions from COVID. I mean, it's been difficult, especially in the Philippines, where things have been on more stringent lockdown, especially where our office is. I mean, it's almost like being put in jail, because a lot of these people live in a small apartment and they can't even leave. They had like a pass where they could leave like once a week to do some quick grocery shopping, and that was about it. But we've been very fortunate because we spend a lot of time up front. And so you're asking secret tips. I mean, for me, it's been when you're doing it yourself and you're in a rush to hire somebody, no matter who you are, your tendency is to want to shortcut that, right? You want to like just get the person hired and get the job done as quickly as possible. With a hiring manager there, I can tell them like, look, like your performance is based on like how many people we keep, how good of employees we're hiring. We are a total quality over quantity. Like, you're never going to be judged on how many people we hire. It's going to be on how good is a person. And some roles stay open for 4 or 5 months before we can fill them. It takes quite a long time. And now that he's been with us for like a year, he realizes that we'll give him that leeway and give him a long leash. In the Philippines, some roles are just a lot easier to hire for. I mean, the Philippines, which is where our office is, and our bulk of our employees. And so if we're hiring a customer service person, for instance, we can hire someone probably for that role in just a week or two, because there's plenty of them. We've been trying to hire a PPC manager right now for like 4 months. They're just few and far between in the Philippines. There's just not a lot of experience there. The easier roles to hire, graphic design, we hire a lot of graphic designers. That seems to be a relatively easy role to hire. For a content writer, much more difficult, because again, it's just not discipline there. So
that was a question that, sorry that I'm interrupting you, but that was a question
worries.
that came up a lot in the chat about writers. Everybody needs good, reliable writers. Oh, Anton needs a PPC manager. Hey, Anton, don't play your own agenda in these. Okay, so Samrise is looking for a PPC manager. But guys, what tips do you have on hiring writers?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we definitely do, and I think this came up earlier, we never hire a writer full time until they've written at least 10 pieces of content for us. And so through the hiring process, they have to write a sample for us. There's always every role that we have has a test. And so writers have to write a sample. One of the keys that we found for a lot of success with this particular role is if someone is a writer by hobby, they have their own personal blog, or they write things for their own personal enjoyment, we've had a much higher success rate there. And so that's something that we look out for. But in terms of writers, they have to write a sample. We read it and judge it and kind of grade it ourselves internally. If it isn't just absolutely top notch, then we won't hire them. And it's an easy role to put them on like a probationary period of 10 pieces of content. We obviously pay them. We pay them for the sample, by the way. We don't ever ask anybody to work for free. I think that's
good.
Not fair. And then they're on the clock for the first 10 pieces of content. But even through that, we're still coaching them and training them and putting them through our process, and we pay them for that as well. But if they aren't writing good content by the end of that, then they just don't make the final cut.
Yeah, the writing is in the writing, basically. Mm-hmm. So Mads, is that how? Do you have a specific process for hiring writers?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't personally hire writers in the Philippines. So again, I always try and look for ROI, and I have like certain roles. So developers, I love Eastern Europe. Writers specifically, I tend to go native. So we do quite a lot of content, but we've just found that the time it takes generally to hire people in the Philippines, even though we have a big office there and so on, the challenge is that, first of all, the people who are so good that we want to hire them in the Philippines are so uniquely good in the Philippines that they can often get other local jobs that pays much more, right? So for us, like we actually have one of the pieces of our outsourcing business is around content writing, right? So we have a lot of native writers, and we're at a point now where we're getting native content at about a similar rate as we would have to pay for the very good Filipinos that we've been able to find over time. So that we have that working really well. But I would say generally in terms of testing and so on, always testing. Now, what I've seen is that a lot of writers burn out. Like when we have great writers, like they might last a year or maybe 2 years, but at some point they just burn out, right? And it's probably one of those roles. Like I've even though I've worked with a ton of writers, I haven't worked with a single writer that have worked with me for 5 years, as an example. So,
is that your experience as well, Jimmy?
Well, I mean, I've got maybe a couple that have been with me for 5 years or more. We started our content team pretty early on in our business, but it wasn't one of the first like SEO departments that we had built out. What I can say, having a lot of different experiences with very successful and much less successful writers over the years, is someone who's good at writing may have nothing to do with like writing or content in their career. As an example, very often, actually, some of the best writers I've ever come across have really serious jobs doing other things and just have like a creative passion to write. There are a lot of people out there that write novels for themselves and things like that. So when you really get into like who is the character of this writer, and my experience is all here in the United States. We don't hire outside of the United States for anything. But like you start to see that there's a sort of a passion and a personality for the craft that doesn't actually really tie to like resumes in a lot of cases. And so what I've seen over time is like, we started off with a model that was very like, you come here, you're a writer, you more or less fill tickets for SEOs that need writing done for their clients, more or less, right? Early on, that's kind of how it worked. As we've taken on more, you know, most of our clients are very large, recognizable brands. We're writing on very distinguished, heavily read sort of publications as their blogs or whatever else. We have to really make sure we have strong kind of editorial controls and editorial teams.
Right.
And actually, like, the most, and we're constantly changing how we do it and looking at new ways of doing things, but the most impactful thing I've seen is us going to a model where we actually start to look for like a journalistic, I don't want to say a journalistic background necessarily, but a journalistic fit. So our real model is like, it starts with editing. It starts with like, this is what the newspaper wants to do, if you will, right? You think of it as a newspaper. And this is what ends up like actually getting briefed to a writer writes it. You could think of them as like a traditional freelancer for a newspaper, whatever. In our case, most of the time they're in-house working for us as more junior writers. And then it goes back up a chain, right? Of like, whoever requested it is now editing it. They're senior, they're signing off on it. So putting in layers, because like someone that wants career growth here in the US at least, they realize like they can't just be a writer forever, right? And getting to that spot where they really are controlling content strategy, sort of working to make people who are more junior writers better under them. Just like anything else, getting that infrastructure in place where people can be happy to move up and feel like they're in a real career role has been super helpful. And actually an early sort of, my philosophy early on in building an agency was like, we want to keep everything in house. We want to work with great big clients that want that. What we've found over time is like, for certain things, you might need a subject matter expert who loves to write. And it might be much better to keep your like real editorial staff in place and just managing that process, right? From someone who may be a freelancer, if you will, may not be on staff. You may not need for 40 hours a week. It's really tough for a good, smart, college-educated person to be writing really, really hard for 40 hours a week, right? Whereas a bunch of people that have an extra 15 hours a week and are really good writers can fit into the right process if you have the right infrastructure and hierarchy on top. So
so what I'm hearing is the key is to create a real content team. So the writer is not on their own just pooping out all these SEO articles, but they're part of something more inspiring that can help them from a burnout. We had a question, by the way. Sorry, I'm going to ask it before I forget. I think it was Brenda. She asked, what's a normal price? Brenda Gear. Hi, Brenda. What's the typical price for an 800-word blog? I'll count to 3 and then you all say a price. 1, 2, 3. Nobody says anything.
We don't ever write anything that's short, so it would be hard for me to really say. I mean, I can tell you just our structure and what it really costs us for writing. Our typical content piece now is about 2,500 words. We don't ever write to a particular word count. It's writing the best piece of content that we can about that subject that's ever been written on the internet is kind of our goal. And
what do you think is normal price for 1,000-word post?
Yeah, I mean, well, for 2,500 words, we're spending about $200 to $300 per post when you add up all the costs of our content team and the graphics team and the editorial. It goes to a few different people. It just depends on the quality that you're looking for. I mean, you can get 800 words written for $25. Might not be nonsensical, right? But I mean,
you can use a Jarvis AI writer.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Jimmy, how much are you able to get it down to?
I mean, it's a super hard question to answer because I agree with Mike 1,000%. You could get it done on Fiverr. You could also pay $2,000 for a post that has tons of like rich media and graphics inside of it, the type of stuff that we create that's like really built to rank. So yeah, I mean, I think paying $200, like think 10 cents a word at the very, very, very minimum, if you don't want to be like embarrassed, and I think $200, you probably start to get into like, a higher quality range. You could pay a lot more.
Yeah, I got very lucky. I have I use a writer service in South Africa, and they charge £25 per 1,000 words, but it's not with graphics or anything like that. But it's really good quality. It gets us contributor accounts at high quality sites. So I'm really happy. If they ever decide to fire me as a client, I'm screwed. All right, let's.
Yeah, so
Can I just add
would,
one last thing on the writer thing, just real fast? I mean,
Mike?
another thing that's important is obviously with Google's algorithm, you want people that have authority and trust, and so if you can actually use the person who's writing the content and link to them and their profile, and they are an actual certified. Let's say you're writing about hot and cold therapy. We use doctors to write some articles, or we have a blog about tactical stuff. We have like an ex-military guy that's that writes, and we can link to that. That's going to have a lot more clout and carry more weight. We might pay more for it, but it's going to give us a lot better result. And so it's not just a matter of like, is the writing good, but can we use that writer's name when we attach it to that? Some things we use, writers to write it, and then we pay someone else to put their name on it or whatever. But these are all things you got to consider when you're looking at the cost of the content.
Yeah. So I think all the time you need to understand what it is you're trying to do, right? So again, you need to look at your competitors. So, sometimes you're building a small affiliate site for some weird niche, and you can probably spend, $30, $40, $50 for 1,000 words and be fine, right? But a lot of the time, again, if you're doing SEO for clients, like, if you're doing SEO for a top lawyer in New York, you probably need very, very, very high quality content if it should ever touch their website, right? So you need to understand where you are and what the niche requires and all this kind of stuff. So, but again, like one of the key things for me is like, we have an editor either per site. I mean, ideally, we publish at least one piece of content for our affiliate sites, for example, per day. And we have an editor specifically for each site, right? So we make sure that even if it's written from different writers and so on, it kind of have the same red thread going through it. And that it's really like we have someone who's really vested in making sure that the content is significant quality, right?
Awesome. I noticed we only have 3 minutes. We got to do some more questions. Otherwise, people are going to complain on Twitter. Anton, would you be so kind of picking more questions? Oh, yeah. Danaskar Balakrishnan. How to filter people who fake their experiences and sound more convincing and real? Ooh,
well, again, just do the testing. I mean, so for me, definitely testing. And as I said, the videos, I mean, honestly, a lot of the time, the videos, it's hard to describe sometimes why they give so clear results, but sometimes you just watch a 2-minute video and that guy or that woman is not someone I want to hire, right? So
so testing the videos. Oh, sorry, Jimmy.
Sorry, I would say like on top of a lot of tests, other things, project work, like ask situational questions. Sometimes we'll hire someone who you'll ask them like, what would you do in this situation? Here's a technical issue. What would you do? They'll be totally wrong on like how they actually answer. They may be wrong technically, but you'll see that they have a good thought process that's based on real experience that they're going through. Like if someone's completely faking their background, that's where people will start to get tripped up in a serious way where you can know quickly.
Well, I would also turn it around and say in most cases for people hiring early on, honestly, again, the skills for me is not that important. I mean, if someone had been an outreach specialist for 10 years, honestly, my focus is still on the attitude and mentality and all that stuff. Not really. I mean, it's great. Like if they have experience, I'll ask them about it. I'll ask them specifically what they've been doing, etc. But honestly, it's not something that weighs significantly heavy in those kind of roles. Now, if, like Jimmy says, if you're hiring a senior manager or something, it definitely is. But my favorite, I mean, I love growing people from within because then you know what you're getting. Hiring senior level staff from the outside is often more tough, and you have to have a much better hiring process because the risk of failure is just higher, right?
Yeah, I have a question real quick for you guys. So in my own agency, I sometimes promoted really good specialists to project manager because I thought, oh, now they can manage a project. But
Yes.
then it was so stupid.
No, but Bibi, it's not a stupid thing to do. But here's the thing: if someone is good at doing outreach, it doesn't mean they're good at managing people. If someone
Yeah,
is good at doing sales, doesn't mean they're a good sales manager. But the key thing is, if someone can be good at sales, if someone can be good at outreach, they can generally learn to be a good manager. But just like most things, they need the training, and that's a lot of what I do. Like I train and coach many managers and business owners and so on, right? The key mistake, and most business owners do that, they promote people into management roles, and there's literally no training, there's no support in about the management skill. Like they promote someone into a sales manager role, and then they will literally buy them sales training instead of management training, right? Which is where it goes wrong, right? So the best investment, if you're promoting people into management or leadership roles, you wanna invest in the training and in the development, because they're gonna be important for your business going forward, right?
yeah, I'll definitely remember that. Did you guys ever make that mistake, Mike and Jimmy?
Yeah, I mean, I think your tendency is to, because it's convenient, right? They're already there. You're going to promote them into being the manager and just expect them to just do a good job at it. And we luckily don't make that mistake anymore. I think all of us have to kind of go through it to learn. I mean, where it gets sticky is when the person you kind of advertise that the role's out there, the person wants to do it, but you know that they're not probably
Yeah,
going to do a good job at it, and you hurt their feelings. That's something that we've been dealing with more now, because we are a lot more selective about who we promote to that role. They've just shown other tendencies where they wouldn't necessarily be good at managing a team, but they want that title or they want that extra money. And we do try to hire from within the most we can. I mean, we can't always do that, but we just, I'd rather put someone in a management role that we know what we're getting. But again, not everybody's going to be cut out to be a manager.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Jimmy, did you ever have that?
So real quick, I'll say, like, we use our outreach team. Our outreach team is our biggest team. We use it to hire entry-level people, typically right out of college, that are, to Maud's point, I mean, I couldn't agree more with everything he said there. You want eager, you want somebody who's ambitious, trying to use this as a step in their career. We have a lot of little steps from where you start there before you would get onto like an SEO strategy team or something like that. So generally, I can't think of an example of where we put someone into like a very senior role from an internal promotion and it was too fast. We have had that problem happen when we hire people externally many times. But actually a huge part of our success has been in using that team to really figure out like who is awesome and who can move forwards into greater roles. And that's provided a lot of success for us.
And just one small point to that, like start developing people before they get the role, right?
Yeah.
One of the absolute key things, and that's what I do with my entire team. Like when I have someone that I consider having management potential, I start training them. Sometimes people have been working on developing management skills for 2-3 years before they move into a management role. But then, like again, if they're starting from scratch, they're so far away, right? And if they move into a management role, they're more likely to make big mistakes and really break their neck. Whereas if they've trained for a couple of years, they're much more closer to it, right? So fundamentally, I mean, even like as Jimmy said, like even if you're promoting people from within to more technical roles, again, if you have people that are interested in that, get them to spend time with people who are doing more technical roles than they are, to start learning more stuff. Like delegate pieces to them so that they start learning and growing, and they feel they're not just doing the same thing, but they actually learn more process, they learn more skill set, because then taking that step is so much easier than if it's literally moving from one role to another role without ever having any idea of what they do, right? And it builds teamwork. Like when you have people within a team, also capacity. I mean, if you promote someone from team A to team B and you suddenly have a shortage of team A, you can still get them back there and help once in a while if needed. Or the same, I mean, you might have a shortage in team B and you might have someone who have done a bunch of stuff and can actually go and help and support them.
Oh, Jason Bernard says, I thought Jimmy Page was a guitarist. guitarist from Led Zeppelin.
Then you're aging well, Jimmy.
Right.
One more question before we go. We're actually over time. Jason was talking about how to let go of how you would do things, as opposed to your team member.
Right. So the key aspect here, and this, like the simplest way I can explain it is, a business is like a pyramid. In the beginning, there's only one stone, which is you. The only way a business grow is by growing the pyramid. The only way to grow the pyramid is increase the value of things that you do. Anything you do that could be done by someone getting paid less than you per hour is waste of company resources. So if you're sitting copy pasting stuff, if you're sitting, creating reports for a client that someone getting paid $3 an hour could be doing instead, basically you're wasting company resources, and you are actually holding the company back from growth because you are spending your time doing $3 stuff instead of doing $300 stuff, right? So if you're serious about growing a business, that is where you want to focus, right? And that's like my management training goes through a lot of that stuff, but the fundamental is looking at it from a financial perspective and really looking at, could I hire someone for significantly less than I'm paid per hour who could do this well, or at least to a similar level as myself? And if the answer is yes, if you want to grow a business, that is what you do.
Yeah, you just gotta let it go. Even if they do different, if they use different color coding.
Right, but it's not about that. So right, ask you a different question, right? If you have one website that you have done 100% the way you want, and that's making 10 grand a month, or if you could build a team and you have 10 websites doing 90% of what you want and makes 9 grand a month, would you rather have 10 sites making 9 grand a month or one site making 100 grand a month, right? The problem is, like, that's the mentality, right? I know it's not always like equally simple like that, but that's the mindset, right? So the whole point is people will not always be as great as you. But the thing is, right now you're doing so many things. The whole thing is, when you hire people, what you don't replicate yourself. The people who try and hire a clone of themselves fail. The people who succeed is the people who look at a piece of the pie and says, I spend a certain amount of time doing this. And generally that can be done by someone getting paid significantly less than me. So I will take that piece of the pie and hand to someone else, right? So basically you want to, because the key thing when you're building companies, you have spent 5 years learning something. You don't want to hire someone and teach them for 5 years to be a clone of you and then they run away, right? What you want to do is you want to build roles within your business that are relatively easily replaceable. Not because you want people to leave, but so that you can promote people from one step to the next. And then you can easily find someone else, get them in and do the other role relatively quick, right? So that's generally the fastest way of growing a business. So again, many perfectionists really struggle with it. But here's the thing. Do you want to do SEO or do you want to build a business? If you want to build a business, you have to do it, right? There's no way around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One cool little trick I've seen is if you're a CEO, even if you're a CEO of a 2-person business, redefine your role, actually grid out your role every quarter and be like, why is this my job now? Like, has the company evolved? Am I doing what I should be doing as a CEO right now? Right. And it's easy to be like, my standards are higher. I want to do these things. If you study entrepreneurs, that's very common in people that have high standards. You just have to be practical about the fact that that's not what you're trying to accomplish, right? And take pride in the fact that you're actually building yourself into a CEO role that looks like what a CEO role should look like, instead of just scrambling to do whatever it is that you feel like you need to be doing early on.
Reality is, when you look in the world of SEO, there's so many amazingly great SEOs that struggle to pay their rent.
Oh,
for this reason, for that reason specifically. Right? Because their focus is they like SEO, they like nerding, they like doing everything perfect. But the challenge is that is not the same as building a business.
Yeah, and they give so much and they don't think they deserve getting that back.
It's not about they don't think they deserve it. A lot of them think they deserve it, but they just don't understand that doing everything perfect, like sitting as a CEO, sitting writing 400 meta description by yourself is not a great use of your time.
Yeah.
Do you recognize that, Mike, of your early days, maybe, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all kind of fall in that trap. I mean, and so my advice, there's two things. Number one, start hiring for the things that you know that you're not good at. It'll get you just kind of in a good place of making some hires and delegating some things away from you. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you like to think you're good at everything, but you can honestly say that you're not good at everything, right? Like for me, like I know I've never been good at graphic design. Like I can barely even draw the hangman stick figure thingy. So hire the graphic designer first and get used to having them, working with them, and and eventually you'll get good at delegating some other things that you think that you're good at, or eventually, someone's doing something 80% as good as you, as Matt was saying. I mean, that's the only way you're going to grow your business. The other thing, Mads shared a slide out of traction, that right person in the right seat that is directly out of traction. Read that damn book. And that'll force you into doing this stuff. I mean, it'll force you into making a 10-year plan or a 5-year plan, a 3-year plan, whatever it is. And if you see yourself and your company getting to XYZ point, you will quickly realize that you're not going to do it alone. And you're going to need to hire people. You're going to need to put the right people in the right seats, have, your core values and your competitive advantage and all these things like laid out. That was really where, after, I've been in business for myself since 2004. So we're on 17 years now. It took more than 10 years into that journey before I read traction and really figured out what all the problems were in my business and my life. And also meeting Mads and talking about a few things, but those things make a huge difference. And so I would highly recommend that book.
I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna buy it on my Kindle. So Traction by Gino Wickman. Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, books have always transformed my life.
It's the one book in my life that's made the biggest difference, like by far.
Do you, Jimmy? Do you have a recommendation for a book? Last thing.
I've never read. I mean, I've read Traction a ton of times. I used to run the EOS early on in our business. I've never read. I thought before I got on this, I was like, I hope I don't get asked about books because I don't think I've ever read a recruiting book, to be honest, or anything around recruiting. It's been purely just the experience-based thing for me. Obviously there's a lot of great books out there, but I think for leaders, I mean, read Jim Collins's books if you haven't already. Teach you a lot about how to think about yourself as a leader, right? If you're starting to build a company.
Jim Collins, okay. And you, Mads, one book? Oh, Traction, you said. But
my favorite book, management-wise, is called First Break All the Rules, which is obviously an awesome title. So it's First Break All the Rules, what the world's best managers do differently. So that's my absolute favorite book around management.
Great. I'm going to buy those and get to reading. Okay, guys, if you had more questions, tweet them at Mads and Jimmy and Mike. I think you guys are on Twitter, right? And then you will get it answered if we miss those. This was really helpful. I mean, this is such a coincidence because I'm hiring more people. I'm going to ask all those behavioral questions and what's the other thing? Attitude questions. I think those will really help instead of just skills. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this and see you next time. Thank you, Matt.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Take it easy, Matt.